Rain fell. Too beautiful for what it was, a city breathing out into the warm, wet dark. Gas lamps still burning on a street the maps don't bother to name. The ivy on the iron balconies stirring though there's no wind to move it. There's a door of dark mahogany, older than the country itself. And it opens, before anyone touches it. Inside, the light is amber. Warm. Inviting. A liar, the crowd sits with the stillness of people who have stopped being afraid of the dark. Because somewhere along the way they became the dark, then the temperature in the room drops. Not as a figure of speech, the ice shifts in its bins. The murmur of conversation dies. The way prey goes silent the moment it scents the predator. A woman with $38 in her pocket turns to look, and her hand closes around the neck of a falling bottle of bitters before it has even finished deciding to fall. The rain had no business being this beautiful. That was the first thought. Stepping off the bus at the corner of Drayton and Liberty. One rolling suitcase catching in the gap between the curb and the gutter. The whole city of Savannah breathing out around me. Warm. Wet. Pressed right up against my face like something alive that had been waiting for me to arrive. The second thought was colder. $38. A duffel bag full of bartending uniforms that smelled like a hotel 2,000 miles behind me. And a folded piece of paper with an address that was supposed to be my new beginning. The paper had gone soft at the creases from how many times I'd opened it. On the bus, at the station, in the bathroom of a gas station outside Atlanta, reading it like the words might rearrange themselves into a promise. Neither thought prepared me for what came next. My name is Wren Holloway, and I have always had a talent for arriving in the wrong place. At exactly the right moment. 3 months ago, I had a life in Chicago, a small one. The kind that fits inside a studio apartment and a 5-year plan written on the back of a takeout menu. A bartending job at a decent hotel where the regulars knew my name and I knew their drinks. A savings account that was finally starting to look like a real thing instead of a rumor I told myself at night. A cat named Walter who tolerated me with the cold dignity of a retired judge who had ruled against the world and found it wanting. Then it came apart, not slowly. All at once, the hotel changed hands. The new owners walked through the lobby on a Tuesday in expensive shoes and looked at the bar the way men look at a thing they've already decided to demolish. 2 weeks later, they gutted it, turned it into a members' lounge with a velvet rope and a list and a doorman who used to be a friend, and the manager. A man I'd poured drinks beside for 6 years, a man whose daughter's birthday I remembered, came to me one night with a problem that wore a very nice suit. There was a guest, a regular, a big spender. He'd had a fall in the lobby, claimed the floor was wet, claimed the hotel was at fault, and the lawyers wanted a statement from the bartender on shift that night, saying she'd seen the spill, except there was no spill. I'd been there. I'd watched the man stumble, drunk, on his own 2 feet, his own glass in his own hand. Nobody's fault but the bourbon and the gravity. They told me it was simple. Just sign. Just say the words. Everybody does it. The manager said it the way you say a thing you've already practiced in the car. His eyes wouldn't hold mine. That's how I knew he knew. That it wasn't simple at all. I said no. I'd like to tell you it was courage. It wasn't. It was something my grandmother put in me a long time ago. A woman with hands like driftwood and a voice like a foghorn wrapped in flannel. She used to say a person's only got one thing nobody can ever take. The difference between what you saw and what you're willing to say you saw. Everything else, she said, they can take. Your house, your money, your good name if they want it bad enough. But not that. That one's yours till you give it away. I wouldn't give it away. So they found a reason. They always find a reason. 2 weeks later I was out. No reference. No severance worth the paper they printed it on. And the regular got his settlement anyway. Because somebody else signed. Somebody who needed the job more than they needed the difference. I don't blame her. I've thought about it 100 times since. In the dark. On the bus. And I still don't blame her. I just couldn't be her. My savings went to my mother's surgery. Every dollar of it. And then some I didn't have. Walter went to live with my neighbor in an act of philosophical betrayal he has not forgiven and never will. And the $38? Well, that brought me to Savannah. A city that understood reinvention better than most. The recruiter on the phone had called the place upscale and discreet, and her voice had done a small, careful thing on the word discreet. A little hitch. Like a door being closed softly so as not to wake anyone. I'd been in hospitality long enough to translate. Upscale meant expensive. Discreet meant complicated. Both turned out to be understatements. The bar was called the Hollow Hour. and it sat on a street that seemed to exist slightly outside the logic of the rest of the city. The kind of lane where the gas lamps still burned, even now, even in an age that had electricity to spare, where the iron balconies overhead were draped in something that wasn't quite ivy and wasn't quite shadow, and moved a little when there was no wind to move it. The door was heavy, dark mahogany, older than the country by the look of it, and it opened before I touched it. The man on the other side was enormous, not tall and broad the way bouncers are, more like a cliff that someone had measured and fitted for a suit. He looked at me the way old stone looks at rain, without urgency, without surprise, with the patience of a thing that has seen a great deal of weather come and go and expects to see a great deal more. "Wren Holloway," I said, holding up the paper like a passport at a border. "I'm the new hire." He moved aside, said nothing, which, honestly, should have been my first clue, but I was tired, and I was broke, and the warm, wet dark of that beautiful rain was at my back. And the amber light inside was the first warm thing I'd seen in 3 days that wasn't a vending machine. So I went in. The inside of the hollow hour was everything the outside promised, and several things it hadn't mentioned. The ceilings ran up into the dark, up past the reach of the light, up to where the rafters became suggestions, and the suggestions became nothing at all. The booths were deep burgundy velvet, the color of wine held up to a candle, the color of something between celebration and warning. The light was amber and low, the kind of light designed to make everyone look like a painting from a century that wasn't quite real. The kind of light that flattered and concealed, and did both at once, which is the only trick worth knowing in a room like that, and it was full, at 6 in the evening, with the most quietly unsettling crowd I'd ever seen. I'd worked hotel bars long enough to build a whole science of guests, a field guide. I could name them on sight. The business traveler nursing a single malt alone, checking his phone like it owed him money. The couple celebrating something with manufactured laughter, performing happiness at each other across the small table. The regular who orders the same thing every Thursday and means it like a prayer, like the drink is the only fixed point in a week that keeps trying to come loose. These people fit none of it. They sat with the stillness of people who have never once been in a hurry, who learned. Somewhere down at the bone, that time was not a thing they needed to manage, the way you and I manage it, anxiously, with glances at clocks, with the low, constant hum of the hours running out. These people had set that hum down a long time ago, and the quiet where it used to be was the most unsettling thing about them. They were beautiful in the way that makes you look away, not because it's unpleasant, because it's too much, like staring at the sun and feeling your eyes start to argue with you about it. The woman behind the bar was around 40. Dark auburn hair pinned up with a precision that suggested she had done it the same way for a very long time. The clean economy of movement that only comes from 20 years of service. Not a wasted gesture, not a step she didn't need. She looked up when I came close, and something in her face shifted, from assessment, to something I didn't have a name for yet. Something that looked, if I'm honest, a little like grief, though I didn't understand that until much later. "You're the Holloway girl," she said. "It wasn't a question, Wren. I'm supposed to start tonight, you are." She put out a hand. Ondine. I run the floor. Her grip was cool, dry. Certain, the grip of a person who has decided a great many things and does not expect to revisit them. "Let me tell you 3 things," she said. "Before you touch a single bottle, 1 finger, you do not ask the guests questions. Beyond their order, a 2nd finger. Whatever you see behind that door." She tilted her head toward a dark panel at the back of the bar. A door I hadn't noticed until she named it, and then could not stop noticing. You didn't see it, a 3rd finger, and you do not. Under any circumstances, draw attention to yourself. When he is in the room, I should have asked who he was. I didn't, because that was my other talent, the one that got me into trouble in Chicago, and in the apartment before Chicago, and in the small coastal town in Maine where I grew up, where I once followed a light I wasn't supposed to follow, and found a thing I wasn't supposed to find. I had a catastrophic tendency to find things out. The hard way. Always the hard way. My grandmother used to say I'd been born with one hand already reaching for the stove. 3 hours into my first shift, I'd already learned a few things. That the clientele tipped in a way that broke the standard math of the trade. Bills that were older than they should have been. Crisp in a way that suggested they'd been somewhere dark and dry for a long time. That the bourbon behind the bar included bottles with no labels I recognized, and a few with no labels at all, just dark glass and a weight in the hand that didn't match the size. and that Ondine's 3 rules were less like guidelines, more like survival instructions, the kind printed on the back of a door in a building that has caught fire before. I was reaching for a high shelf when the temperature dropped, not metaphorically. The actual air in the room changed, a subtle, unmistakable drop of several degrees, the way a room feels when somebody opens a window onto winter. The hair on my arm stood up before my mind had decided why. My body knew before I did. Bodies usually do. I heard it in the ice behind the bar, that soft, crystalline, settling, of cubes that hadn't been touched, shifting in their bins as the cold reached them. I heard it in the silence that replaced the murmur of conversation. Not the silence of people stopping to look, the silence of people who already knew, who'd arranged their bodies into the careful stillness of prey that has clocked a predator and decided the smartest move is to not move at all. To be furniture, to be unremarkable, to not be the slow one at the edge of the herd. I turned, and I understood, with the clarity of someone who has just put a hand on a live wire and felt the whole electrical truth of the world introduce itself. Exactly who Ondine had meant. He was standing in the doorway, tall in the way that rearranges a room. Dark hair swept back from a face that the amber light loved and feared in equal measure. A jaw that looked carved by somebody trying to prove a point about jaws. A charcoal suit, beautifully cut, the kind of suit that costs more than my mother's surgery and wears it lightly. No tie, the top button undone. And the whole effect was a man who owned the concept of formality and had simply chosen, tonight, to set it down. Like a king who removes his crown because there is no one in the room who could possibly mistake him for anything else, his eyes moved across the room. Slow, total, a man taking inventory, not of the guests, of everything. The doors, the exits, the angles, the slow ones at the edge of the herd, they landed on me. I dropped a bottle of bitters, it didn't break. I caught it on the way down, a reflex. Nothing more. 12 years of catching things behind a bar, written into the muscle so deep it doesn't ask permission. Except the catch was too fast, too clean. My hand was around the neck of that bottle before the bottle had finished deciding to fall, and he had seen it. One corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. More like the acknowledgement of something. A thing noted. Filed away. For later then he walked to a private booth at the far end of the bar, unhurried. The crowd not parting exactly, but adjusting, the way water adjusts around a stone it has known a long time, and the room exhaled. I felt it leave them. The held breath. The bar warmed by a degree as the door swung shut behind no one, because he was already inside, already seated, already pouring the air around himself into whatever shape he wanted it to take. Ondine appeared at my elbow. Out of nowhere, I told you, she said. Very quiet. Don't draw attention, I dropped something, and caught it. She looked at me with an expression I'd learned to recognize. The look of someone watching a person walk toward a cliff, in brand new shoes. On a wet night, there's a difference, she said. Between what? Between dropping a thing and catching it like you did. Anyone can drop a thing. She picked up a cloth, wiped a spot on the bar that didn't need wiping the way bartenders do when they're choosing their next words. He doesn't watch people who drop things. He watches the ones who shouldn't be able to catch them, and then she walked away, and left me standing there, with the bottle of bitters still in my hand, and the cold still draining slowly out of the room, and the distinct sensation of having failed a test I hadn't known I was sitting. His name came to me in pieces over the next 2 hours, Sebastian Vale. That was the name the other bartenders used, in low, careful tones, when they thought I couldn't hear. There were 2 of them besides Ondine, a young man named Felix, who moved like he was apologizing to the floor, and an older woman named Marisol who didn't move much at all. They said the name the way you say the name of a storm that's coming, with respect, and a little dread, and the specific quiet of people who have decided the weather is not their business. The guests called him nothing to his face. The staff just called him him. The pronoun carrying the weight of a full title, he, as though there were only one. As though the word had been built for him and loaned out to the rest of the language as a courtesy. I learned other things too, that he came in every Thursday, without fail. The way the tide comes in, that he always sat in the same booth, the deep one at the back, the one with its back to the wall, and a clear line to every door, that he ordered one drink, an aged red that Ondine poured herself from a bottle kept separate, in a cabinet she unlocked with a key she wore and never mentioned, and that he never finished it. The glass would sit, the red going slowly dark and still, and at the end of the night it would be carried away, nearly full, and what happened to it after that nobody said. That no one sat with him. unless invited tonight. Somebody had sat with him uninvited. I noticed because the temperature dropped again. Sharper this time. A second winter through a second window, the man who'd slid into the booth across from him was smiling. The specific smile of a person who has rehearsed it for confidence, in a mirror, in a car, and not quite gotten there. The smile had corners that kept slipping. He was talking, leaning in, his hands doing the small, busy work of a man trying to sell something. And whatever he was saying, Sebastian's face was the surface of a frozen lake, still, total, impenetrable, the kind of stillness that isn't calm, the kind that's a held breath the size of a house. And then Sebastian looked up from the man and looked directly at me, across the whole length of that long amber room, past the beautiful, unhurried dead, right at me, and I was already moving. Later I wouldn't be able to fully explain it, only that some part of me had read the room the way you learn to read rooms in this business. The part that knows a fight is coming 3 seconds before the first glass breaks. The part that has you reaching for the phone before the shouting starts, and understood something was about to go very wrong, and that the only thing in the immediate vicinity that could interrupt it was me. It was a terrible idea. I knew it was a terrible idea. Ondine's third rule was still warm in my ear. Do not draw attention. And here I was on my first night, walking the length of the room toward the one man I'd been told to make myself invisible around. I picked up a cloth and a glass, props, armor, the tools of my trade held up like a small shield. And I walked to the booth, and I said, in my most professionally neutral voice, the voice I use for the drunk and the dangerous and the about to be difficult. Sorry to interrupt. Can I refresh anything for you? The man across from Sebastian went very still. Sebastian looked at me. For a moment that lasted longer than moments usually do. I felt it stretch. I felt him take me in, all of me. The cheap shoes and the borrowed steadiness and the cloth I was gripping a little too hard. Then he said, low, precise. Each word set down like a coin on a counter, yes. In fact, he gestured to the seat beside him. Sit, I'm on shift. My voice did not shake. I was proud of that. I have learned to be proud of small things. They are the only ones that come reliably. You are now on a different kind of shift. And something in the way he said it made the hair on the back of my neck stand at full attention. Not fear, exactly. Fear's cousin. The one that lives next door and shares a fence with curiosity. Sit, please. And look at me, as though you know me. The man across the table was watching me now, with an expression I did not like at all. The expression of a man recalculating. A man who had walked in with a plan and was watching the plan develop a complication in real time. I sat. Sebastian's hand came to rest on the table. Close to mine, not touching, but close enough that the cold coming off him was a physical thing. Like holding your palm an inch above ice and feeling the cold reach up to meet you halfway. Good, he said, so only I could hear. His voice dropped to a register that didn't carry past the two of us. Now smile, like I've just said something that surprised you. Pleasantly, I smiled. It was the smile I used when a guest insisted a drink I'd made correctly was wrong. And I had to agree with him, while knowing I was right. The smile that says, of course, you're absolutely right, let me fix that, while the truth sits quiet and unbothered behind my teeth. I'd been told it was very convincing. I'd been told it was the best lie I tell, precisely because it isn't quite a lie. It's a courtesy wearing a lie's coat. The man across the table stood, abruptly, the bench scraping. Another time, he said. Directed at Sebastian, there won't be one, a statement of fact. Nothing more. No threat in it, which was worse than a threat. A threat admits the possibility of an argument. This admitted nothing. The man left, quickly, without looking back, and the cold went with him, draining out the heavy door into the warm, wet night, and the booth was suddenly just a booth again, with two people in it, one of them mine, and one of them very much not. The booth was very quiet. Thank you, Sebastian said. After a moment, you're welcome. I started to rise. Do you want me to go now? He looked at me, the full weight of those dark eyes, and I sat back down without deciding to. No, I want you to tell me your name, Wren. Wren Holloway, he repeated it, not as a greeting, as something being catalogued, filed in some vast quiet archive behind those eyes. Wren Holloway, drawer, folder, done. How long have you worked here? Wren Holloway? Tonight is my first shift. Something moved across his face. Not surprise. More like the confirmation of a hypothesis. The small satisfaction of a man whose suspicion has just been handed evidence, and yet you walk to this booth. I've worked bars a long time. You learned to read a room? What did you read? I had a rule, a personal one, built over years of working rooms full of powerful people. Never tell a powerful person what you actually think of them. The first time you meet, it tends to flatter or alarm, and both are inconvenient. Both make you memorable in ways that cost you, but there was something in the way he asked, direct, without performance. Like a man who'd grown so tired of being lied to that the truth had become the only thing that could still get his attention. That made the rule feel temporary, suspendable. Just this once. That the man across from you wanted something you weren't going to give him, I said, and that it was about to get unpleasant, and that an interruption would resolve it faster. Then whatever you were about to do, and what was I about to do? I don't know. But the temperature dropped about 3 degrees when you looked at him. I figured I'd step in. Before we got to Frost, he was quiet a moment, the kind of quiet that isn't emptiness. The opposite. A quiet so full of something it has no room left for sound. You felt that, he said, finally. The temperature. Yes, most people don't. He studied me, with an attention that was different from being looked at, more like being read, page by page. By someone who took his reading seriously and had all the time in the world to do it. They notice the effect, he said. Not the cause. They feel cold and they reach for a sweater. They do not ask the cold where it came from. You asked? I didn't know what to say to that. So I said nothing, which, it turned out, was the right answer. The right answer in that booth was so often nothing. I would learn this. He had spent a very long time around people who filled silence to win it. And here I was, leaving it alone, letting it sit between us, like a third chair nobody needed to take. I have a proposition for you, he said, and every nerve in my body filed a small collective complaint, because I'd learned, through catastrophic personal experience. That sentence's beginning with I have a proposition tended to be the origin point of most of my more memorable disasters. The manager in Chicago had a proposition. The landlord before that had a proposition. Life had been lately one long parade of men with propositions and very nice suits, and yet, I said, I'm listening. He leaned back. The way people do when they've already decided, and are now just arranging the words. Into the order most likely to be accepted. There was no doubt in it, no salesmanship. The decision had been made somewhere behind those eyes a while ago, and what came now was simply the paperwork. In 3 days, he said, I'm required to attend a gathering, a conclave, of certain parties whose for cooperation I need. For matters I won't detail, he paused. Let the word conclave sit there, an old word, a church word, a word with cold stone in it. To arrive alone would signal a vulnerability I'm not prepared to concede. I need someone to attend with me, as my intended, your intended, my bride, in appearance only, for the event, and the days of social obligation around it. 7 days. In total, I looked at him. I looked at the beautiful unfinished room and the beautiful unfinished man, and I thought about the $38 sitting in my pocket like a small flat stone. You want to hire a fake fiancé I want to retain, he said, with a faint emphasis on the word, the way a man corrects a phrase he finds inelegant, a woman of sufficient composure and perception, to play the role convincingly, among guests who will be actively looking for the cracks. And you decided, based on a 3-minute conversation, that I'm that person. I decided in about 45 seconds. The remaining 2.5 minutes were courtesy. I should have said no. Every reasonable fiber in me understood this, lined up and said it together, a small choir of good sense. I'd just arrived in a new city. I had $38. I had no idea who this man was, or what his world contained, beyond the evidence currently in front of me, which included a temperature drop when he walked in, and a clientele that moved like people who had stopped being afraid of the dark. Because at some point they had become the dark, had crossed over to its side of the window and pulled the curtain shut behind them, I said. How much? He named a figure. The glass I was holding did not shatter, which I counted, in the moment, as a personal triumph of composure. The number was enough to cover my mother's remaining medical debt. The whole ugly weight of it, gone, lifted off her chest, where it had been sitting for 3 months, making it hard for her to breathe. 3 months of rent on a real apartment with a door that locked and windows that opened, and a savings account with enough left over to make Walter's absence feel, financially at least, survivable. But that's not why I leaned in. I leaned in because of something he'd said, the cracks. He'd said it like he already knew where mine were, like he'd run a finger down my whole life and found every seam, every weld, every place I'd been broken and badly mended. And I wanted, with a sudden and inconvenient hunger that surprised me with its teeth, to prove him wrong. 7 days, I said. 7 days. You'll be given clothing, a private room in my residence, your employment here placed on hold, with full pay. At the end of the 7 days, you return to your life, and I'll have no further claim on your time. And what does the role actually require? To appear at my side, to conduct yourself like a woman who chose me freely and would choose me again, and to trust that whatever you observe in the next 7 days stays between us. I thought about the man who'd been sitting across from him an hour ago, the rehearsed smile, the way the table went still when I sat down, the way the temperature followed him out the door like a dog called to heel. The man you sent away, I said. He was a problem. He was a message. From people who are watching, for signs that I'm isolated. A man who attends this conclave alone. In my world, is a man who has lost his alliances. They read it as weakness, and they move accordingly, the way wolves move, toward the one who limps, and a man who attends with someone convincing is a man who chose carefully, which sends a different message entirely. It says I have not been emptied out. It says there is still something in my house worth defending. People are far less likely to test a man who appears to have something to lose. Loss makes a man dangerous. Loss makes a man unpredictable. They prefer their prey resigned. I looked around the bar. Ondine was watching us from the far end, with an expression that was either professional neutrality or concealed alarm. On her, after one night, I genuinely couldn't tell. The two looked nearly identical, which I would later understand was the point. I need to know one thing, I said. The people at this conclave, are they dangerous? He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. He did not wave it off. He did not reassure me. He gave it the weight of a real question being asked by a person whose safety would depend on the answer. To most people, yes. To me, if you do exactly as I say. No, and if I don't, then we'll both have a problem. And something in his voice was not a threat. It was a precise statement of observable fact. The way you'd say the bridge is out, or the ice is thin. Information offered, not menace, which was somehow worse. A threat you can argue with. A fact just sits there, being true, but I don't anticipate that, he went on. You read a room in 45 seconds, and made a decision most people with a decade in my world wouldn't have made. You'll do fine. I let out a breath. It came out steadier than I expected, 7 days, and at the end. I walk away clean? You have my word, I had no particular reason to believe the word of a stranger who'd just hired me to be his fake fiancé. In a bar that existed slightly outside normal physics, on a street where the lamps still burned gas and the ivy moved without wind. By every rule I'd ever been taught about strange men with money, I should have stood up and walked out into the rain and never looked back, but the room was quiet. His voice had been steady, and the specific practiced instinct of a person who has spent years reading the difference between people being honest and people performing honesty. The instinct that had kept me safe behind 100 bars on 100 bad nights told me, with a clarity that surprised me, that he meant it. Okay, I said. He extended his hand. It was cold. I shook it. And the cold was not unpleasant. That was the first surprise. I had expected to recoil. Instead, I found myself noting, somewhere far back in my mind, that it was a clean cold, a still water cold. The cold of a deep place that has simply never been warm and has made its peace with that. My car will collect you tomorrow at 8. Pack light. Everything you need will be provided, he stood, buttoned his jacket with 2 unhurried fingers, and walked toward the dark panel at the back of the bar. The temperature in the room rose, in increments, back to normal. The dead unbent themselves. The murmur returned. The ice settled, then Ondine appeared. What? She said, carefully. Did he say to you? He offered me a job. She looked at me a long moment, with the expression I'd later learn was not concealed alarm after all, but something closer to recognition. The look of a person who has seen this exact scene before, from this exact angle and knows how it ends and cannot say so. Of course he did, she said, quietly, almost to herself, and walked away. His car arrived the next morning at 7:58, which told me something about him, before I'd even climbed inside. A man who arrives at 7:58 for an 8 o'clock is not early and not late. He is precise. He is a man who has decided that 2 minutes is the correct margin between courtesy and presumption, and who has never once been wrong about it. It was black, long, silent. With that quality of expensive vehicles that seem to generate their own gravity, that make the cars around them look like they're trying too hard. The driver was a woman, compact, watchful, dark eyes that ran a thorough assessment of me, and my one rolling suitcase. In about the time it takes to blink, she did not introduce herself, then or ever. I learned later her name was Sable, and that she had been driving for the house longer than the house had been at this address. Miss Alloway, not a question. That's me. She took my suitcase without being asked, placed it in the trunk with a care that suggested she had opinions. About luggage. About a great many things, probably, all of them kept behind that flat, watchful face. Inside, the car smelled like cedar. And something older. Something that belonged to stone corridors and candlelight and rooms that had not been aired in 100 years and somehow were not stale. There was a card on the seat. Heavy paper, the kind that cost something just to hold. No envelope. My name on it in handwriting that moved across the page like it had somewhere important to be and was being polite about getting there. There will be a fitting this morning. Wear what they suggest. The role requires it. Breakfast has been arranged. It was signed with a single letter. The car moved through the early city with the ease of something that knows where it's going, and has never once been unsure of its right to go there. The street slid past, washed clean by the night's rain, the oaks dripping, the Spanish moss hanging in gray curtains that the morning light came through in slow gold bars. We pulled through iron gates I recognized from the night before, though in daylight they looked different. Less forbidding, more like a declaration. A statement made in iron about who lived behind them and how long they intended to. The property beyond them was a house, in the way that a cathedral is a building. Technically accurate, fundamentally insufficient. 3 stories of pale stone and dark shutters. Galleries running the width of each floor, deep porches in shadow even now. Places built for sitting out the heat of an afternoon that this house seemed to hold at arm's length. Window glass that caught the morning light and held it. Did not give it back the way ordinary glass does. Kept it, the way the man kept everything. A man named Lucan showed me inside. He had the specific energy of a person who has been employed by the same household long enough to absorb its priorities entirely. Who has stopped being a separate person and become, instead, a kind of extension of the house's will. He was old in an ordinary way, which I found oddly reassuring. A human age. A face that had weathered like a face should. He led me to a room on the 2nd floor that was not a guest room, in any hotel sense. It was the size of my entire Chicago apartment. The bed had 4 posts and white linen so clean it looked like a held breath. The windows looked over a garden that was formal without being cold, box hedges, gravel paths. A fountain that was running, though I never once saw anyone tend it, and there was a rack of clothes by the window. Dresses in deep blues and wine reds, a structured charcoal jacket, evening wear that made the most expensive thing I'd ever owned look like a conversation piece at a yard sale. I ran a hand down the silk of the nearest one before I could stop myself, and the fabric moved under my fingers like water that had decided to stay. A woman came in, around 60. Silver hair pinned up the way Ondine's was, I noticed, and filed the noticing away. A measuring tape looped around her neck like a talisman, like a stethoscope, like the badge of an office. She introduced herself as Marguerite, and she looked at me the way architects look at a building site. Professional interest, no personal opinion. A problem to be solved and she the woman to solve it. Try the blue, she said, pointing. The silk one, not the navy. The one with the French seam, I did. She walked around me 3 times, slowly. Made adjustments I couldn't feel, but that apparently mattered. A pin here, a tug there. Her hands cool and quick and entirely without hesitation. You carry yourself well. Do you know that? I've been told I have good posture. That's not what I mean. She pinned something at my shoulder. You know where your body is. In a room. Most people don't. They're always a little surprised. By this they take up. They bump into door frames. They apologize to furniture. You don't. You move like you've already decided where you end and the world begins. She stepped back. Looked at me in the long mirror. He chose well. He chose fast. He'd known me about 45 seconds. Marguerite smiled. The smile of someone who was not surprised, who had, perhaps, expected exactly this answer. He always knows fast, she said. And it's been a very long time. Since I've seen him wrong, I had a great many questions about that sentence. About how long Marguerite had been pinning dresses in this house. About how many other women had stood in this exact spot in front of this exact mirror while she walked around them 3 times and pronounced them well chosen. I asked none of them. Some part of me already knew I didn't want the answers yet. Breakfast was laid in a sunroom off the back of the house, where the garden light came through the glass and made everything warmer than the stone walls suggested was possible. It was, I would come to understand, the one room in the house that the morning was allowed into fully. A concession. A small daily truce. I ate alone. Which I'd expected. What I hadn't expected was that the food was exactly right. Eggs prepared in the specific way I preferred, soft, barely set, the way I'd only ever made them for myself and never told a soul, without anyone having asked. Coffee strong enough to mean something, strong enough to be a statement. Fruit that was ripe rather than decorative, which is rarer than it sounds in houses like this, where so often the food is meant to be looked at and not loved. I was on my second cup when he walked in. In daylight, Sebastian Vale was different. And exactly the same. The suit was gone, replaced by dark trousers, and a shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, the forearms beneath them pale and corded and still. He looked less like a painting, and more like a person, which was somehow more unsettling, because it closed some of the distance I'd been using, as perspective, as protection. A painting you can look at safely. A person looks back. He sat across from me, without preamble, and poured himself coffee, that he would not drink. I'd learn this later, that the coffee was a social gesture, a bridge between his world and whoever he happened to be sitting with. A way of saying, I will sit at this table with you and pretend, for the length of this conversation, to be a man who drinks coffee in the morning like a man. The fitting went well? Marguerite is precise, she is. He looked out at the garden, briefly. I need to explain what you'll be walking into. That would be helpful. He set the cup down, squared it on its saucer. A small ordering gesture I'd come to recognize, that he made before saying anything that cost him. The people at this conclave are not people, in the conventional sense. They're what I am, creatures of significant age, significant power, and significant interest in the dynamics of everyone around them. It is the only sport left to them, after a few centuries. Watching each other, pressing on each other, finding the give. They will be watching you, for what? For cracks. A performance is only as good as its weakest moment. If you hesitate when someone asks how we met, if you flinch when I touch your hand, if your smile doesn't reach your eyes, they'll know. They have watched 10,000 smiles fail to reach 10,000 pairs of eyes. They are connoisseurs of the failed smile, and they'll use it. The conclave exists because open conflict is expensive and visible. So the warfare is social. Information is currency. A doubt about my stability becomes a thing they can trade. A small coin passed hand to hand, gaining weight as it goes. He paused. You being here makes me look stronger. You being obviously fake makes me look desperate, which is worse than coming alone. A man alone is merely unprotected. A man with a bad disguise is frightened, and they can smell fear from great distance. They have been smelling it for a very long time, so I need to be convincing. You need to be real, he said, with a precision that split the two things cleanly apart like a knife through the white of an egg. Not an act. Real. The best lies always are. The best lie is a true thing aimed in a false direction. I thought about that. Then I asked him the question I'd been carrying since the night before. The one that had kept me up in the white linen, staring at the 4 dark posts of the bed. Why me? He looked at me a moment, as if deciding how much to spend. As if honesty, for him, came out of a finite account, and he was checking the balance before making a withdrawal. Because I made some inquiries. After you left the bar, inquiries. There was a bartender in Chicago who lost her job because she refused to sign a statement she knew to be false. A man offered her money to say she'd seen a spill that wasn't there. She said no. She lost everything, and she still said no. The sunroom was very quiet. The fountain murmured somewhere out in the garden. A bird I couldn't see said one thing and then thought better of it. That wasn't in my application. No, it wasn't. I set my coffee down, very carefully, because my hand had developed a sudden and inconvenient unsteadiness, a fine tremor running through it like a struck wire. You looked me up, I did, before you offered me the job. Or after. He held my gaze, before I confirmed it. I knew within 45 seconds you could read a room. That's a useful skill, common enough. I can hire it on any corner. What I needed to know was something else, which was whether you could be bought. Everyone at this conclave can be bought. That's the whole architecture of the place. Every appliance, every silence, has a price, and anyone whose price is known is a liability. A door with a lock everyone has the key to. He leaned forward, slightly. The cold came with him, a half degree, a tide. A woman who walked away from everything. Rather than say a thing she didn't believe, is the one person in that room that no one will know how to price. They'll spend the whole evening trying, and they'll fail, because there's nothing to find. There's no figure. The account doesn't exist. I sat with that. It should have felt like a compliment. It didn't. It felt like being handed back something I'd lost, by a stranger who had no business knowing I'd lost it. The thing my grandmother put in me, the one thing nobody can take. He'd found it in a database, in a settled lawsuit, in the dry public record of the worst 3 months of my life, and he'd held it up to the light and said this. This is why. You're not afraid of me, he said. It wasn't quite a question, and it wasn't quite an observation. It was something between. Something he seemed to be testing the weight of, turning over, checking for soundness. Should I be? Most people are. I've worked bars for 12 years. I've been afraid of people. Real fear. The kind that lives in your stomach and tells you which exit to stand near. I know exactly what it feels like. You don't make me feel that way. Something in his expression shifted. So slightly I almost missed it, a fractional softening. Like the moment before ice begins to change. Before the first thread of water finds its way down the inside of the cold. Good, he said, and stood, and walked out of the sunroom. I sat with my coffee, and looked at the garden, and tried to name what I was feeling. Not fear, as stated, not comfort either, something in between. The particular alertness of standing on ground that is solid, but new, where each step asks for your attention, not because it's dangerous, but because nothing is yet familiar. The alertness of the first day in a country whose language you only half speak. 7 days, I told myself, and then home, what I did not know, sitting in that sunroom, with the garden light on my hands, and the good coffee going cool in its cup. Was that by the time the 7 days were through? The man across from me would not be the most dangerous thing I'd met, that somewhere out in the old dark of his world, there was a creature older and more patient than Sebastian Vale, who already knew my name and had begun, very quietly, to wonder whether a woman who couldn't be bought could still be broken. But that was days away. For now there was only the garden, and the cooling coffee, and a man with a cold hand in an old house, who had looked me up, and found the one thing about me I'd thought the world had thrown away. I picked up my cup. The coffee was exactly right. Of course it was. Day 1 passed in preparation. We worked in the library, a room that had no business existing in a private house, and yet existed here, with the casual confidence of something that had never once considered being anywhere else. Shelves ran floor to ceiling on 3 walls, filled with books that had the worn solidity of volumes that had been read, rather than displayed. Spines cracked, pages soft, the smell of old paper and older leather thick enough to lean on. A fire burned low at one end, even in the Louisiana heat, even with the afternoon pressing wet and green against the windows. Because the house, I was beginning to understand, ran at Sebastian's temperature. Not the climate's. The fire wasn't for warmth. It was for the look of warmth. Another bridge, another courtesy. He was a precise instructor. We practiced the way we walked together, his hand at the small of my back, cold through the fabric of my dress, and yet not unpleasant, a grounding thing. The way a cold surface on a warm day clarifies your sense of where you are, wakes the skin, reminds the body that it has edges. He showed me the difference between the touch of a man performing partnership and the touch of a man who has a right to it, the second being less demonstrative, more certain, a hand that doesn't display, it simply is. The performing hand grips, announces, says, look, we are together. The real hand rests, says nothing, has nothing to prove. He moved my own hand twice, gently, to show me where a real one would fall, and his fingers were cold and exact, and I held very still under them. When someone asks how we met, he said, what do you say? What do you want me to say? Whatever you'd say. If it were true, I thought a moment. Outside, a dove said its low, sad thing. I'd say I was working, that you came in on a busy night. And something about the room changed when you walked in, that you asked me to sit with you, and I said yes before I understood why. He looked at me. Something flickering behind the dark. That's real, I said. Every word of that actually happened. Yes, he said quietly. It did. There was a silence after that. The kind with weight to it, the kind you could have set a glass down on, and I broke it. Because I always break it. Silence, and I have never gotten along for very long. You drink coffee you don't drink. You pour wine you don't finish. You hire a fiancé you don't want. Does anything in this house get used for its actual purpose? A corner of his mouth moved. The closest thing to a laugh I'd seen in him. You. Apparently I walked into that. You did. Repeatedly. It's becoming a pattern, so that was day 1. Walking, talking. The small architecture of a love that didn't exist being built board by board in a firelit room. And the strange thing, the thing I didn't admit to myself until much later, was how easy the boards went up. How little they creaked. Day 2 was the briefing. He sat across the desk from me, a leather-bound ledger between us, its cover soft as a glove, and he went through the guest list, name by name. The way a diplomat is briefed before a border. The way a general is briefed before a field. Imogen Auclair, he said. Elder, 3 centuries. She'll test you by asking questions about me that I supposedly should have told you. Things a real intended would know. Answer as though you know more than she thinks, but reveal nothing. How? Ask her something in return. Elders hate being questioned. It reverses the current. She'll redirect. She'll change the subject to protect her own privacy, and in doing so, she'll let you off the hook without ever knowing she did it. He turned a page. The paper whispered, Castellan Rue, younger, 2 decades. He'll be warm, interested. He'll seem to like you, and the seeming will be very good, and every word will be currency he's saving. Filing, say very little, smile a great deal. Men like Castellan mistake warmth for alliance. Give him warmth and let him mistake it, he went on. 12 names, 12 calibrations, 12 small doors with 12 different locks and the right key pressed into my hand for each. And I noticed something. He described them all with the same level of detail, the same even, measured pressure, except one. You've listed 12 people, I said. You've given me instructions for each, but you described them all evenly, the same weight, the same care, which means you're talking around the one you're actually worried about. People do that. They circle the thing they can't look at directly. They give equal attention to everything to hide which one thing has them. He stopped, set the ledger down, and for a moment he just looked at me, and I couldn't read the look, except that it was new. His name is Casimir. The fire seemed to drop a degree. The shadows in the high corners of the room leaned in a little. He is very old, Sebastian said. Older than me, and very patient. Patience is the only thing he has more of than I do, and it has made all the difference, and he has wanted what I have. For longer than most of that guest list has been alive, and what does he want? To watch me weaken, and then, when it's cheap enough, to take it. He has never paid full price for anything in his life. He waits for the markdown. He has waited centuries for markdowns. He'll wait centuries more. He met my eyes. He'll be looking for proof that my position has slipped. You are the counter-argument. You are the thing I put in his way, me specifically, a man who chooses well. Sends a message, and what does choosing me say about you? He was quiet a moment. The fire ticked, that I trust my instincts, which I have not doubted. In a very long time, I looked at him. The line of his jaw in the firelight. The careful stillness that I was starting to understand was not calm, but control. A thing held shut, with effort. A door leaned against from the inside. You keep saying a very long time, I said, like it's a unit of measurement. Like it's a thing you could lay end to end and count. It is, he said. For me. It's the only unit I have left that means anything. And he didn't smile when he said it. The firelight moved on his face and found nothing in it to lighten. Day 3 started like the others. It did not end that way. I woke early. Before the house stirred. Before even Lucan's quiet footsteps began their rounds. And went down to the sunroom. The garden was still wet from yesterday's rain, every leaf holding its small bright weight of water. The light was thin, golden, the kind that comes before a city fully wakes, when the world is briefly content to simply exist, to be looked at and ask nothing in return. Lucan brought coffee, with the quiet efficiency I'd come to find deeply reassuring. He set it down, nodded, and withdrew, and I was grateful for him in a way I couldn't have explained. He was the one thing in that house that aged, the one ordinary clock in a building full of stopped ones, and then I heard him, not footsteps. He didn't make footsteps. He moved the way weather moves. Present before you register the shift, the barometer of the room dropping a hair, the skin knowing before the eyes. But I heard something. A door, a breath of displaced air, the curtains stirring where no window was open. And then he was in the doorway, not in the rolled sleeves of yesterday, in clothes he'd clearly been in all night. The charcoal suit, but rumpled now, the line of it broken. His hair less ordered, a piece of it fallen forward, a tension in his jaw that was different from his usual precision. The look of a man who had spent the dark hours in a fight only he could see. You're up early, I said. I didn't sleep, do you? And then I caught myself. Sorry. I don't know how that works. Sometimes he came in, sat. Not at the far end of the table where he'd sat the first morning, the chair closer to mine. The distance closing again, a half foot at a time, over 3 days. When there's something worth waiting for, he poured coffee, set it down. Did not drink it. Casimir sent a message this morning. The name landed in the room, with a temperature of its own. The golden light didn't change, but it felt like it should have. What kind? The social kind. His jaw tightened. He has heard. Through channels I haven't yet identified, which is its own problem. Because it means there is a leak in my house, and I don't know where. That I'm attending the conclave with someone. He sent his congratulations. That sounds nice. It wasn't congratulations. It was a probe. A finger pressed to the ice to test the thickness. He's trying to determine if you're real. If this is real, he looked at me, and for the first time, there was something in his eyes. That wasn't the calibrated composure of the last 2 days. The smooth surface he kept on everything. Something raw. If he decides it isn't, he said, the conclave becomes significantly more dangerous, for both of us. But for you first. They always go for the soft one first. It's not cruelty. It's economy. Then we need to be more convincing. Yes. Which is what I need to discuss. With you, I waited. I'd learned by day 3 that waiting was the one thing I could give him that no one else in his long life seemed willing to. The performance so far, he said, has been practiced. Correct. Technically sufficient. If the conclave were a test of choreography, we would pass it. He was choosing words, with unusual care. Like a man crossing ice, each foot set down slow, weight transferred slower. What Casimir will be looking for is not technique. He's been alive long enough to recognize a polished surface, to distrust it, in fact. He'll be looking for the imperfections, the unrepeatable evidence of 2 people. Who have actually chosen each other? What kind of evidence? The way you look at me when I'm not looking at you, he said, quietly. The way I reach for you before I've thought about it. The conversation that happens. Under the conversation. The thing the words sit on top of, he met my eyes. Those things cannot be practiced. They either exist, or they don't. A man like Casimir has spent 400 years learning to tell the difference, and there is no fooling him on this point. There is only being true, or being found out. The sunroom was very quiet. The fountain murmured. Far off, the city was beginning to wake. And you're telling me this, I said, carefully. Setting my own foot down slow on the same ice. Because you think they don't? He was still a moment, a long one. The longest I'd seen him hold a silence, and he was a man who could hold silence the way other men hold their breath. And then he said, I'm telling you this, because I think they might. I had not expected that sentence. I had no prepared response for it. None of my smiles fit it. None of my rules covered it, so I sat with it. The way you sit with something that has rearranged the furniture. In a room you thought you knew. You stand in the doorway and the couch is where the table was, and the whole familiar shape of the place has quietly become a different place while you were out, Sebastian. This is not a renegotiation, he said, quickly, and I recognized it as the tone of a man heading off his own mistake, closing a door he'd opened by accident. The terms are what they were. 7 days. You walk away. Nothing about the arrangement has changed. I'm simply being honest with you. Because you seem to respond better to honesty than to strategy. And because it seems wrong somehow to let you walk into that room without telling you the truth of what I see. When I look across this table, that's accurate. About the honesty, my own voice had gone careful. Most people I've worked for would have managed me. You're trying to. And failing. And telling me you're failing. It's disorienting. I imagine it is. I'm out of practice. I have not been honest with anyone in a manner that could cost me. In longer than you've been alive, I have not brought anyone here. In a very long time, he said. Not to this house, not to this role. He picked up the coffee cup, set it down again, without drinking. A nervous gesture, I realized, the first I'd ever seen him make, and the realization did something to my chest. When I sat across from you in that booth, and you read the room the way you did, walked the length of it on your first night, against every instruction you'd been given. I did not make a strategic calculation. I told myself I did, after. I built the strategy around it, like a frame around a window someone had already broken. But the truth is, I made an instinctive one. And those are different things. The strategy was the courtesy. Same as the 2.5 minutes, I looked at him. At the tiredness around his eyes. That was not the tiredness of one missed night, but something older. The tiredness of a man who has been on watch so long, it's become structural, built into him. Load-bearing, when did you last trust someone? I asked. He thought about it, which told me the answer was not recent. A man who trusts often has the answer ready. A man who has to think has been alone a long time. Long enough ago, he said, that the memory of it is more concept than experience. I know that I did, the way you know a city you visited as a child. The shape of it is there, the streets are gone, that sounds exhausting it is, and the admission was so clean, so undefended, no hedge around it, no qualifier, no retreat. That it did something to the shape of the space between us, made it smaller, warmer, even in a room kept cold on purpose. We sat in the morning light, for a long moment, without speaking. And it was not an empty silence. It was the other kind, the full kind. The kind he and I were apparently very good at making together. And then he said, in a different voice, lighter, deliberate, as if choosing to come up for air after staying down too long, the conclave is tomorrow night. Today. I thought you might want to see the city. The city? You arrived 3 days ago, and haven't left this house. You traded one unfamiliar room for another. That's not how you settle into a place. A place doesn't become yours from the inside of a house. You have to walk it. Let it walk back. You want to take me out. I want to walk through the quarter with you. In daylight. As two people who might conceivably have chosen each other. And because you've been very patient. With a situation that required a significant amount of trust, given freely, when I'd done little to earn it. And I find that I want to do something that's less about strategy, and more about that. I looked at him. The rumpled suit, the fallen hair, the honest, exhausted eyes of a man 3 centuries old asking me, almost shyly, to go for a walk. Give me 20 minutes, I said. We walked out the iron gates at 8. He didn't take my hand right away. We walked a half block apart, in the way of two people who are aware of each other, hyper-aware, and making a careful project of not showing it, without making it a statement. The city was waking up around us. Coffee shops pulling back their shutters with a rattle and a sigh. Bakers propping doors open onto the cool of the morning, the smell of warm sugar and wet stone and river air, moving through the streets like something with intention, something running an errand. A man hosed down the sidewalk in front of a shuttered restaurant and nodded to us as we passed, and I realized with a small shock that to him we were simply a couple. A man and a woman, out early, walking close. The disguise was already working on the world, and we hadn't even tried yet. And then Sebastian said something. About a building on the corner. A tall, narrow house the color of butter, with ironwork like black lace across its galleries. The history of it. A detail that was specific and unexpected. Something about a duel and a staircase and a debt that took 40 years to come due, and I turned to look, and when I turned back, he'd closed the distance, without announcing it, his arm near mine, his pace matched to mine, the half-block gone, and neither of us said anything about it, because to say anything would be to admit there had been a distance to close. We walked like that for an hour, through the quarter, down toward the river and back, through streets I didn't know the names of yet, but was beginning to want to. Streets with their squares and their oaks and their old slow patience, a city that had burned and flooded and been left for dead more than once, and had simply, each time, gone on being itself. He knew the city, the way people know things they've loved a long time. Without needing to say so, without performing the love. He pointed out things without performing the pointing. A worn step, a bricked-up window, a line of older stone in a newer wall where some earlier building had refused to be entirely forgotten. He asked me questions. About Chicago, about Maine, about the bars and the winters and the cat named Walter, and listened to the answers, in a way that meant he was actually storing them. Not waiting for his turn, storing, the way he stored everything, drawer, folder, done. Except these he seemed to want. At some point I realized his hand was at the small of my back, not staged, not practiced, just there. The way it would be if it belonged there. The way he'd taught me a real one would be, and I realized, walking through the waking city, with the morning light on the old buildings, and his cold hand a steady weight against me, that I had stopped counting the days, which, honestly, should have terrified me more than it did. We stopped at a small place 2 streets back from the water, the kind with 4 tables and a tin ceiling and a man behind the counter who looked like he'd been making coffee since before either of us was born. Though in Sebastian's case I suppose that was unlikely. Sebastian ordered, for both of us, and got mine right. Exactly right, down to the way I take it, which I had never once told him. You keep doing that, I said. Doing what? Knowing things, the eggs, the coffee, how I take it. You're not asking. You're just knowing. I pay attention. He looked at me across the small table, the steam rising between us, his own cup untouched as always. It's most of what I do. Pay attention. For a very long time, to very many people. You'd be surprised. How rarely anyone notices that's what's happening. They feel known and they think it's magic. It isn't magic, it's only attention. Held long enough, most people can't hold it. They get bored, or frightened, of what they start to see, and what have you noticed? About me? He considered it. Turned his untouched cup a quarter turn on its saucer, that you say no when it costs you. And yes when it doesn't have to. That you break silences because silence frightens you a little, though you'd never call it fear. that you carry your grandmother around in your spine like a second skeleton, and that you have not, in some time, had anyone pay attention to you. The way you pay attention to a room. You give it constantly. You're very good at it. And no one gives it back. I didn't have an answer for that. The thing about a man who pays attention is that eventually he hands you yourself, and you don't always recognize the gift, and you don't always want it, and sometimes it's so accurate it takes the breath clean out of you. So I drank my coffee and watched the man behind the counter, and let the morning do what mornings do. When you finally stop trying to manage them, "Can I ask you something?" I said. That breaks Ondine's first rule. You don't work for her this week. You work for me, ask? How old are you? He looked out the window, at the street, at the light moving over the old stone, at the city he'd loved long enough to know the duels and the debts. Old enough, he said, that the answer would stop being a number and start being a weight. I found it's kinder. To both of us. If I don't make you carry it, a number you could hold, a weight like that, you'd have to set down somewhere, and I'd watch you do it. And I'd know exactly what I was. That's not an answer? No, he agreed. But it's honest about why it isn't, which is the closest I come. Most days. To the thing itself, I let it go, because here's the thing nobody tells you. About sitting across from a man who has watched centuries go by, while you nurse a $4 coffee in a place with a tin ceiling, you'll stop wanting the number and start wanting the man behind it, which is its own kind of danger. A worse kind, maybe, than any of the dangers Ondine had warned me about. And I knew it. I felt it happening, the way you feel ice begin to give underfoot, and I drank my coffee anyway, and let it. We walked back the long way, and neither of us hurried, and the city, having walked back, was beginning to feel less like a stranger, and more like a thing I might one day call mine. The conclave was held in a building the city didn't know existed. That was not a metaphor, the address Sebastian had shown me. On a hand-drawn map. Rather than a phone, because some things, he said, should not be allowed to live in a machine that could be made to talk. Corresponded to what any map would call a decommissioned cotton warehouse. On the edge of the old district, down where the streets gave up their names and the river breathed its brown breath over everything, the outside was appropriately derelict. Convincingly abandoned, boarded windows, a roof with its spine half broken. The kind of building a city stops asking questions about, drives past, forgets it ever wondered. The inside was another matter. We arrived in the black car, Sable at the wheel in her particular focused silence. I was in the midnight blue dress Marguerite had fitted, and it moved the way good fabric moves. With intention. With me, not against me. A dress that had been taught my body and remembered the lesson. Sebastian had given me something before we left. A necklace. A single dark stone on a fine chain, and the stone caught the light strangely, held it the way the house windows held the morning. It sat at my collarbone, with the weight of something chosen, not borrowed. His fingers had been cold at my neck when he fastened it, and I'd felt the clasp click, and he had not stepped back right away. And neither had I. "How are you feeling?" he asked. In the car. The city sliding dark and wet past the windows, like someone walking into a room, full of people, who are very old, and very good at noticing things, accurate. He considered me in the low light. "Tell me what fine looks like. In this context, you leave with the same number of secrets you came in with. And with me, that's the whole job," he said. And something in how he said it told me he meant more than the job. The doors of the warehouse opened as we approached. No hand on them. No hinge that I could see doing the work. They simply opened, the way the bar door had opened on my first night. And I was learning to fold these impossibilities into the ordinary, the way you learn to stop hearing a clock. Which was the first of several things that night that technically should not have been possible. And simply was, inside. The space had been transformed, a high vaulted interior. The broken roof somehow whole again. From in here, or perhaps from in here, it had never been broken. Lit by chandeliers that belonged to a different century, dripping crystal. The light in them, not quite the color of any flame I knew, draped in fabrics that moved, even where there was no air. The floor was dark stone, polished to a black mirror that gave back the chandeliers upside down. The music was live, and came from somewhere I couldn't locate, strings, low and patient, played by no one I could see. The guests were already assembled. They turned when we entered. Not obviously, not all at once. But I felt it, the collective reorientation of attention, subtle as a shift in pressure, before a storm. 40 faces, 50, finding us, weighing us in the space between one breath and the next, and then returning, with perfect courtesy, to their conversations. But the weighing had happened. I'd felt myself be lifted and measured and set down. Sebastian's hand was at my back. Certain, there, the real hand, the one with nothing to prove. And I leaned into it a fraction, the way I'd been taught, and found I didn't have to act the leaning. We moved into the room as though we belonged, which is different from moving as though you're allowed to be there. The second is permission. You move carefully, gratefully, ready to be asked to leave. The first is ownership. You move like the floor was poured for your feet. He had taught me this on day one, walking the length of the library, his cold hand at my spine. Now I felt it become true. The first to approach was a woman in gold, Imogen Auclair. 3 centuries, and it showed. Not in her face, which was smooth and ageless and lovely as a coin, but in her pace, in the quality of her attention, the unhurry of her. She looked at me the way appraisers look at objects, for the markers of authenticity, the small, honest flaws that forgers never think to add, invisible to untrained eyes, plain as day to hers, so she said, warm, curious, pointed. 3 things at once, the way the amber light had been 3 things at once. This is who finally managed it. Managed what? His attention. I didn't manage anything. He made up his own mind. They tend to. I felt Sebastian go very slightly still beside me. It had been the right answer. A managed woman would have demurred, would have made herself small, would have given Imogen the pleasure of the chase. I'd refused the chase. I'd handed it back. Imogen looked at me a beat, longer than she'd intended. These are finding something on the object she hadn't expected. A mark she couldn't place. Then she laughed, genuine, brief. A real sound in a room full of arranged ones, and moved on. Sebastian's hand pressed once. Lightly, at my back good, I moved through the room, and I kept my attention on 2 things at once. The way you keep a busy bar, the way you keep 8 tables and a phone, and a man who's had 1 too many all alive in your mind at the same time. The choreography of the space, and Sebastian. Not his performance, his instinct. I'd been around him long enough now. 4 days that felt like 40 to read, his micro-adjustments. The slight shift when someone politically complex approached. The almost imperceptible stillness when a conversation needed managing. The held breath the size of a house. I responded without discussing it. Filling the space. Redirecting. Providing the specific warmth that his temperature couldn't. He was the cold and the gravity, and I learned, over the course of that night, to be the warmth he could stand next to laugh at the right moment, to touch his arm in a way that said mine without saying anything. To be the evidence, it was the strangest thing I'd ever done with my body. Stranger than the dress. Stranger than the room. It was also, I realized, somewhere in the 2nd hour. Not entirely unlike bartending, reading the room, responding before being asked, knowing what was needed, and providing it, without ever making the provision visible. I'd been training for this for 12 years and never known it. The whole long apprenticeship of pouring drinks for the powerful and the breaking and the about-to-be difficult had been, it turned out, exactly this. Castellan Roux found us near the bar. Warm, as advertised. He had a young man's face and an old man's eyes and a smile that worked very hard and very well. He asked thoughtful questions and listened to my answers with the bright interest of a man collecting materials. Building something out of me, 1 answer at a time to use later, I gave him warmth and brevity and 2 questions for every one of his. Where did he summer? What did he make of the music? Was the river always this loud down here? Small coins? Handed over freely, that cost me nothing and gave him nothing to bank. When he drifted off, satisfied and empty-handed, Sebastian leaned slightly toward me. You were right about him, he said, quietly. Warmth as currency, common counterfeit. Easy to print, you can always tell. The ones who spend warmth like it's free are the ones who've decided it is. Unlike yours, he said it simply, as fact, without the weight of a compliment, which is what made it land like one. Which made it land harder than any compliment could have. And then I saw him, Casimir. I knew it was him before anyone said a word. Before Sebastian's hand changed against my back. Because the air around him was different. Tall, silver-haired, and the silver was not age but something he'd chosen, the way a king chooses a color. The ageless face that belonged to everyone in this room. But on him it sat differently. More settled. As though time had not just passed through him, the way it passed through the others, who wore their centuries like a held breath, but had sat down with him, pulled up a chair, and come to terms, made an arrangement. Agreed to leave him alone. He was watching us. From across the room, with a stillness that was not passive, but active. The stillness of something calculating. The stillness of a thing in tall grass that has all the time in the world and has already decided how this ends. Sebastian felt me tense. and looked down. "Casimir," I said, so quietly only he could hear. "I see him. He's been watching us. For 10 minutes, since before Castellan. He hasn't moved. I know. What does he see?" "That," Sebastian said, "is what we're about to find out." Casimir moved toward us, slowly, with the patience of a man for whom the word urgency had lost all personal relevance. Centuries ago, he moved the way the river moved outside, brown and certain and in no hurry, having learned that everything comes to the water eventually if the water simply waits. He was smiling. It was not a warm smile, but it was a real one, which in this room, where every smile was a tool and every tool was for sale, was almost more alarming than warmth would have been. Sebastian, a greeting that was also an assessment. A hand laid on the ice to test it. Casimir, equal and opposite. The same flat weight returned. Casimir's eyes moved to me. He said nothing at first, just looked. With the full unhurried weight of his attention, and his attention was a physical thing, a pressure, the deep cold of a great depth of water. I held it, without flinching, and without performing stillness, which is its own tell, the held breath that announces itself. Just existed, in my own space. The space Marguerite had told me I knew the edges of, one hand resting loosely in the crook of Sebastian's arm. As though the most powerful creature in the room were a mild inconvenience, and I had decided to be patient about it. "You chose well," Casimir said. Finally, the same words Marguerite had used, in the room with the long mirror. The same words. But in his mouth they carried a different inflection. One that acknowledged something. He had not expected to acknowledge. A small concession, dragged out of him against his will, and I understood that to make a creature like Casimir concede anything, even a phrase, was to have already won a coin. "I did," Sebastian said. Casimir looked between us, and I watched him do the specific calculation of a man searching for the seam, the line where performance met reality, the place where the forgery showed its hand. His eyes went from Sebastian's face to mine, to the necklace at my throat, to the hand in the crook of his arm, to the half-inch of space between our bodies and the quality of that space. And finding, in his expression, a small revision, a recalculation. That he couldn't locate it, because there wasn't one, not anymore. Somewhere in the last 4 days the seam had closed. The performance and the reality had grown into each other like a graft-taking, and even I could no longer have told you, standing in that black-floored room, exactly where one ended. He turned back to Sebastian. "Walk with me. Just the two of us. Old men have old things to discuss, things that bore the young. Your lovely intended won't mind. The evening is full of people." Eager to know her, Sebastian's hand tightened, a fraction, at my back, so slight that only I, who had spent 4 days learning his hands, would have felt it. "I'll be fine," I said. It was a small lie, and we both knew it, but it was the right one. The intended of a strong man does not cling, does not need him in the room to remain upright. She lets him go and waits, secure, unhurried, the way Casimir himself waited. He looked at me a moment, and then he went. The two of them walked toward the far end of the warehouse, into a corridor I hadn't noticed, that perhaps hadn't been there a moment before, a dark mouth in the dark wall, and the room. The moment they were gone, supply rearranged itself around the empty space where Sebastian had been. The way a room of animals rearranges itself when the largest one steps out, I felt it. The temperature of the attention changing. Warming, almost, which was worse. The held courtesy loosening. The appraisers no longer obliged to be polite to the object now that its owner had stepped away. A woman appeared at my side, younger than Imogen. Older than she looked, which in this room meant something. She'd been across the room a moment ago. Now she was here. With a glass of something dark she did not drink. "You shouldn't have let them go alone," she said, pleasantly. As though the commenting on the weather, on the loudness of the river. Why's that? Because the only reason Casimir ever wants a man alone is to make sure no one sees his face. When he hears what Casimir has to say, she smiled and drifted off. Her work done. The little knife placed, leaving me, with the cold weight of a sentence that had been designed to be left behind, to do its work in the dark after the speaker was gone. I did not move from where I stood, because moving would have looked like worry, and worry was a crack. So I stood, and I held a glass I did not drink, and I watched the corridor, the way you watch a door you can't go through. And I made my face the face of a woman who is bored and secure, and certain her man will come back to her, because that was the only thing on offer that would help him. Imogen drifted back. Eventually, she'd clearly noted that I'd stayed put, that I hadn't gone looking, that I hadn't taken the dark woman's bait and let my face fall. "You don't fidget," she said. "It's unusual. In your kind, my kind, The temporary ones, she said, not unkindly, with something almost like sympathy, which was the most dangerous thing anyone had offered me all night. He's had others. Did you know that? Arrangements. For occasions like this. They come. They play the part. They go. They never last past the occasion. They're never meant to. I'm not planning to last, I said. I'm planning to leave. On schedule. 7 days, she studied me. With 300 years behind her eyes, that's what they all plan, she said. And then the door stays open. Just a little. And they find they can't quite. Walk through it, the schedule comes. And the schedule goes. And they're still here, until they're not. Until something here decides they shouldn't be. She moved off again. And I stood there, thinking about doors, and schedules, and how confident I'd been 3 days ago that I knew the difference between a job and a thing you can't walk away from. Imogen had taken that confidence and turned it over in her old hands and handed it back to me with a hairline crack in it. I hadn't known was there. Sebastian came back 20 minutes later. His composure was intact, the way a wall is intact. After something has hit it, and not quite broken through. You can't see the damage, but you know to look for it now. You know the wall has learned something about its own limits. We're leaving, he said, quietly. At my ear now. We've stayed long enough to make the point. There's no advantage to staying longer, and a disadvantage I'd rather avoid. We made our exit. The correct way. The right goodbyes. In the right order. Imogen caught my hand at the door, and held it a second too long. Her grip cool and certain, like Ondine's, like Margaret's, all these old certain women who'd handed me cracked things all week. Whatever he didn't tell you, she said. Very quietly, under the cover of the goodbye. Ask him on the way home, tonight, while the door is still open. By tomorrow, it closes again, it always does. He'll have made it reasonable by morning. He makes everything reasonable. It's how he survives, and she let go. We drove home in silence for a while. The city slid past the tinted window, the iron and the magnolias, and the particular nightlight that exists only in cities built on water. A wet shine on everything, the lamps doubled in the puddles, the river breathing somewhere off to the left, dark and patient and loud. I let it sit as long as I could stand, which was about 4 minutes. Silence and I have never gotten along for very long, and tonight least of all. What did he say to you? In that corridor, Sebastian was quiet. Don't, I said. Don't tell me it was a formality. The woman in the gold dress told me to ask before the door closes. So I'm asking, while it's open. Before you make it reasonable, he looked at me. In the dark of the car. Something passing behind his eyes, a weighing, the finite account of his honesty being checked one more time. He didn't threaten me. That's the part you should understand first. Casimir doesn't threaten. A threat is a request. It asks for a response. It opens a negotiation. He's past all that, he observes. And then he tells you what he's observed, and lets you sit with the implications. The threat does itself. He just points at it, and what did he observe? Sebastian was silent a long moment, and then he said it. Flat. The smooth surface gone, that I'm weakening, the car seemed to go very still. Even the city outside seemed to hold. What does that mean? It means what it sounds like. There's a kind of strength that comes with what I am. It doesn't last forever. Not for any of us. We are not the deathless things the stories make us. We are only the slow ones. The very slow ones. It thins, slowly, over centuries. The cold gets harder to hold, the room gets harder to fill, and eventually, someone younger, someone hungrier, notices. He looked out the window. At the doubled lamps. At the wet shine, Casimir has noticed. How long? Have you known that I'm fading? A while. I felt it the way you feel a season turn. Before you could name the day it changed. That he knows? Tonight. Tonight I learned that what I feel, he sees, the pieces were rearranging themselves, fast, in my head. The way they do when you finally see the shape a thing has been making all along. And I didn't like the picture they were forming. The fiancé, I said. Slowly. The whole performance. It was never just about looking like you have allies. Was it? He didn't answer. Which was the answer. He'd taught me that himself. People circle the thing they can't look at directly. It was misdirection. You wanted them all looking at me. At us. At the great romance. The new intended. The scandal of it. The interest of it. So they wouldn't look too closely at you. At what's actually slipping. You put a bright thing in the room so no one would see the dim one? Yes, quietly. The word almost lost in the hum of the car, and it worked. Until tonight, it worked. Until tonight, I sat with that. The whole architecture of the last 4 days. Tilting, resettling, on a new foundation. One I hadn't been told about. The walks, the fittings, the booth, the honest, exhausted eyes across the breakfast table. All of it, built on a thing he'd kept under the floor. I should have been angry. A smarter woman would have been angry. Would have counted the lies and named them, and made him hold each one. Why didn't you tell me? And to my own surprise, it didn't come out as anger, it came out as something quieter, something with hurt in it instead of heat. I walked into that room blind, to the actual stakes. You let me think the danger was if I flinched at the wrong moment, if my smile didn't reach my eyes. The danger was you, dying, or whatever it is that happens to a thing like you. When the room finally turns, I didn't tell you. Because the fewer people who carry a weakness, the fewer places it can leak from. I've kept this from people who've served me 40 years. Lucan doesn't know. Sable doesn't know. I'm not people who serve you. For 7 days, I'm the woman pretending to love you. Which means I'm the woman everyone in that room was studying, for tells. And you sent me in, without telling me what the tell would be. You sent me in to guard a secret you wouldn't tell me the shape of. He was quiet, and then he said, "You're right," which was not what I expected. I'd braced for the reasonable version, the one Imogen warned me about, and it didn't come. I'm not used to this. Telling someone something, that can be used against me. The instinct to withhold is older than you are, older than your country. It is the oldest thing in me, older than the hunger, older than the cold. And tonight you walked into a room full of predators, with half the information, carrying my weakness without knowing its weight. Because I couldn't override 300 years of habit. For one mortal woman, I should have, and I didn't. And I'm sorry, I had not. In all my preparation, in all the briefings and the fittings and the walking of the library floor, prepared for the Vampire King of Savannah, to apologize to me, in the back of a car, at midnight, with the wet city sliding past. Okay, I said. Finally, okay? You told me the truth eventually, when I asked. You didn't make it reasonable. The woman in gold said you would, by morning. You didn't even make it to the house, in my experience. That puts you ahead of most people I've worked for. Ahead of most people I've known. A corner of his mouth moved. Even now. Even here, that's a very low bar. You have no idea. The men I've poured drinks for. The things they made reasonable. On the way home, in the back of cars. You'd be appalled. You'd be the most appalled man in Georgia, and he almost laughed. I felt it move through him, the ghost of it, in the dark. We got back to the house near one. The lights were low. The lamp in the entrance hall burned, the way it always did, like the house itself was waiting up. Like the one warm light in all that pale stone was a held thought. But there was someone in the hall, Ondine. She was not in her bar clothes. She was in a dark coat, as though she'd come here directly. From somewhere else. From the bar, maybe, or from somewhere I'd never know. And been waiting, in the dim. For some time. Long enough that the stillness had settled on her like dust. He's asleep? She asked Sebastian. Though Sebastian had just walked in, so it made no sense. Unless it wasn't a question at all, unless it was a password. A thing said to mean another thing. Lucan is. It's late. What are you doing here, Ondine? She looked at him, then at me, and the look she gave me was different from any she'd given me at the bar. There was something underneath it, something old, something that had been waiting as long as she had. I need a few minutes. With her. Alone, Sebastian went still. Whatever you have to say. You can say in front of me, no, I can't. Because if I say it in front of you, you'll explain it away. You'll make it reasonable. There it was again. The word. The third time tonight a woman had used it about him. You're very good at making things reasonable. It's how you survive. But she needs it unreasonable. She needs it raw. The way it actually is, she turned to me. 10 minutes. The kitchen, please. Looked at Sebastian and I made a decision. The same kind I'd made on the first night. Walking to that booth against every rule. The kind your body makes before your brain has signed off on it. 10 minutes, I said. The kitchen was the warmest room in the house. The one room that consistently resisted his temperature. I'd noticed it on the first morning, the way the cold thinned at its door, and I understood now that this was deliberate. That somewhere in the long architecture of this house, someone had decided there should be one room the chill couldn't fully enter. Ondine sat at the long table, and folded her cold hands in front of her. And for a moment she didn't speak. How old do you think I am? She said. Finally, 40. Maybe a little more. I was 40 when I came to work in this house. 30 years ago, I did the math, and then I did it again. Because the first answer didn't work. The first answer couldn't be right. You look exactly the same, I know. The kitchen was very quiet. Somewhere a clock that wasn't there seemed to tick. 30 years ago, I was a person, a waitress, in a city up north. Same as you, same age as you, near enough. And one night a man came into the bar where I worked. and the temperature in the room dropped, and I caught a glass before it hit the floor. Too fast, too clean. And he saw it. I sat down, slowly. Across from her, the chair cold under me, he had a problem. A gathering he had to attend, and he needed someone at his side who could read a room and keep a secret and not be afraid he hired you. To be his fiancée, the words landed on me, one at a time, like cold water down the back of the neck, like the first drop of a rain that's going to soak you through. There were two of us, Ondine said. Me and another woman. He couldn't decide between us, so he hired us both, to prepare. Both of us walked the library floor. Both of us stood in front of the long mirror while Marguerite walked around us 3 times. And then, at the last moment, he chose her for the role, and I was kept on, as staff, as backup. The understudy, standing in the wings in a dress that fit. What happened to her? Ondine looked at me, and in her eyes was the specific exhaustion of a person who has carried a thing alone. For a very long time, 30 years of it, a weight she'd had nowhere to set down. The conclave happened, same as yours. The same warehouse the city doesn't know, the same chandeliers, the old ones studied her. Same as they're studying you, the same hands at her back, the same questions about how they'd met, and one of them decided she was the weak point, the scene, the place to push. And he pushed Casimir, the fire, if there'd been one in that warm kitchen, would have gone out. The warmth itself seemed to thin. She didn't survive the 7 days, Ondine said. I won't tell you how. It wouldn't help you, and it would never leave you. And I did survive. Because I was backup. Because no one was looking at me. The understudy in the wings, and the only reason I'm still here, still like this, still 40 after 30 years, is that Sebastian, in his guilt, after, made me what he is, so that I could stay, and so that I would never have to be a soft mortal thing, in that room. Again, he couldn't save her, so he saved the one who was left. It's the only apology he had. He turned it into centuries. The kitchen was so quiet I could hear the house breathing. The whole vast pale weight of it, breathing in the dark around us. I'm not telling you this to frighten you, Ondine said, though I can see it has. I'm telling you because someone should have told her, and no one did. No one sat her down in a warm kitchen and said the true thing out loud. The romance. The walk through the quarter. I know about the walk. He took her on it too. The same streets. The duels and the debts. The cold hand at your back. The way he says your name when no one's performing, when there's no one to perform for, when it's just the two of you and the morning light. I watched all of it happen once. To a woman who's been dead 30 years. And it was real. That's the part nobody warns you about. That's the part I'm here to warn you about. It was completely real. He wasn't lying to her. He never lied to her. And it killed her anyway. I couldn't speak. There was nothing in me that knew how to answer that. He's not a liar. That's the trap. If he were a liar, this would be easy. You'd see the lie and you'd run. Anyone can run from a lie. But he means every word, everyone. And his world. Eats the people he means them to. That's the thing about loving something that can't die. It doesn't have to learn to be careful. It has never once had to bury a thing it couldn't replace with time. She stood. Her chair, scraping the warm floor. You have a contract. 7 days. 3 of them are gone. 4 are left. There's a door. That hasn't closed yet. Midge told you that, didn't she? They always tell you about the door. Walk out of it. Take whatever he's paying you. He'll let you go. He let me think I could go. Once. He'll let you actually do it. Before it's too late to, she moved toward the hall and stopped in the doorway. Her back to me. He didn't bring you here despite the danger, she said, without turning around. I want you to understand that. He brought you here because you reminded him of someone. He won't say it. He may not even know it himself, the way he doesn't let himself know half of what he wants. But I do, because I knew her. I stood next to her for 7 days. And the resemblance isn't in your face. You look nothing like her. She paused, and the pause was the longest thing in the room. It's in the way you walk to that booth, against the rule, on your first night. She did that too. It's the thing he can't resist, and it's the thing that gets you killed. They're the same thing. They were always the same thing, and then she was gone. The dark coat, the cold certain hands, the 30 years of carried weight, carried back out into the night. I sat in the warm kitchen, alone, for a long time, the longest I'd sat still in years, and I thought about a woman 30 years dead, who had read a room and caught a glass, and said yes before she understood why, who had walked the same streets and felt the same cold hand and heard him say her name in the morning light, and who had stood in that warehouse and been chosen by the old patient thing in the silver hair as the seam. And I thought about the door, the one that hadn't closed yet, The car that could take me anywhere. The money that would pay my mother's debt and rent a real apartment and bring Walter home from his philosophical exile. And I understood. With the cold clarity of someone who has just put their hand on a live wire and felt the whole truth of the circuit. That the most dangerous thing about my situation was not Casimir, and it was not the conclave, and it was not even the 7-day clock, ticking down toward an ending I was no longer sure I wanted. The most dangerous thing was that the door was still open, and I already knew, sitting there in the warm kitchen, with the whole house breathing around me, with Ondine's 30 years of warning still warm in the air, that when morning came, I wasn't going to walk through it. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the 4-poster bed, in the white linen, and listened to the house breathe and thought about a dead woman, and a door that hadn't closed. The 4 dark posts of the bed stood at the 4 corners of my sleeplessness like sentries, and I watched the window go from black to gray to the first thin gold. And somewhere in there, somewhere around 4 in the morning, I made a decision. It was not the decision Ondine wanted me to make. Here is the thing she got wrong. The one thing, in all that careful warning. She thought the story she told me was a warning to run. And it was. She'd meant it as one. She'd carried it 30 years to hand to me as one. But it was also something else. Something she hadn't meant to hand over at all. Something that had come tucked inside the warning like a key sewn into a coat. It was a map. Because the woman 30 years ago had died for one reason. One reason only, when you stripped away the rest. She'd been the seam, the soft spot, the mortal thing in a room of predators, and she'd had no weapon of her own. She'd been a piece, on someone else's board, moved by hands that weren't hers, played and lost and swept off the table. I was not going to be a piece. I'd spent 12 years behind bars. And bartending teaches you exactly one thing that nobody else in the world thinks is a skill. Until the night they need it. Until the night the whole evening turns on, whether someone remembers what someone else said 3 hours ago when they thought no one was listening. It teaches you to remember. Day 4 came up gray. I found Sebastian in the library, where he spent the hours he didn't sleep. A map spread on the reading table. Hand-drawn, old, covered in annotations in 3 different hands, across what looked like several centuries. Rivers and territories and lines that meant nothing to me. Yet you spoke with Ondine, he said. Without looking up, I did. She told you about Lenore, so the dead woman had a name. Lenore. He said it the way you say a name you've worn smooth from holding. She didn't tell me her name. She told me everything else. He set the map down and looked at me, and I saw he'd been expecting this conversation since 1 o'clock. Since he saw Ondine in the hall, then you know why you should leave. The car can take you anywhere this morning, with everything I promised, the whole figure, no conclave, no claim. You walk away clean. I'll make sure of it. I made the same offer to her. Once, too late. I'm making it to you in time. Take it? Is that what you want? He was quiet. No, it's what I should want. They're not the same thing. I've spent 3 centuries learning the difference and burying the difference and calling the difference reasonable. And tonight, for the first time in a very long time, I'd rather have the thing I want than stop offering me the door. I'm not taking it. I've decided. Around 4 o'clock, while you were down here with your map, he looked at me, and there was something in his face I hadn't seen before. Not on him, not once. Hope, held very carefully, like a man holding something he's been told he'll only ever be allowed to drop. You don't understand what you're staying for. I understand exactly what I'm staying for. Better than you do, maybe, because I didn't spend 300 years learning to look away from it. Casimir is going to expose you, not kill you. Expose you. He's going to stand up in front of those old creatures and show them you're fading, and the second they believe it, they'll come apart from you, one at a time. Like ice off a roof in spring, and then he takes everything. Slow, at the markdown. The way he takes everything. Sebastian said nothing, which meant I had it right, and you've decided, haven't you, that the only way out is to give him what he wants. Hand it over yourself, on your terms, before he can take it on his silence confirmed it. A different silence than before, a caught one. You're going to surrender. I'm going to make a controlled withdrawal. From a position I cannot hold. It's the difference between abdication and defeat. One leaves you with something, the other leaves you with nothing. I have done the arithmetic 1,000 times. There is no other line on the board, and me, where do I fit? In the controlled withdrawal, you don't, that's the point. That's the whole point. The moment I withdraw, you're no longer attached to anything Casimir wants. You're free, safe, forgotten. A footnote to a thing that ended quietly. That's the best outcome I can engineer, for you. The only gift I have left to give is your own irrelevance. I looked at him, and I understood, with a clarity that took the breath clean out of me, that this man, this 300-year-old creature, who could empty a room by entering it, who held cold and gravity in his 2 hands, was going to lay down everything he had, everything. The house, the bar, the long, slow centuries of accumulated power to get me out of a room. No, I said, Ren, no. We're not doing that. You don't get to die quietly, so I can live forgettably. That's not a deal. That's not a rescue. That's just a slower kind of losing for both of us. And I have done enough slow losing this year to know it when I see it. It's the only board I know how to play. I've been playing it for 300 years. I know every square, and on this board, there is no version where I win. I've looked. I've looked for centuries. The board doesn't have the square on it, then we're going to play a different game. He looked at me. Truly looked. What game? Mine, because here's what I'd worked out, at 4 in the morning, in the white linen. While the house breathed and the window went from black to gold, Casimir's whole strategy depended on one thing. One assumption holding everything else up, that the conclave ran on strength. That it was a room full of predators, measuring each other for weakness, and that whoever was weakest got taken. And on that board, Sebastian lost. Because Sebastian was, in fact, getting weaker. On the strength board, the truth itself was his enemy. But that wasn't the only thing the conclave ran on. I'd been in that room, for one entire evening, watching, with the only eyes I had. The eyes of a woman who has spent 12 years watching people who are certain they're not being watched. And the conclave didn't run on strength, it ran on debt. Tell me about the debts, I said. Sebastian blinked, which on him was the equivalent of a normal man falling backward out of his chair. What? You said it yourself. Day 2. Across this desk. Information is currency. Every alliance has a price. Every silence has a price. Which means everyone in that room, every single one, owes someone. Some old debts, old favors, old betrayals nobody's ever collected on. I leaned forward, both hands flat on the old map. You've been alive for 3 of those people's whole lives. You watched them become what they are. You know where the bodies are buried, because you watched some of them get buried. So tell me, who does Casimir owe, and who owes us him, and who has he crossed and gotten away with it, only because no one ever said it out loud, in front of everyone, at the same time, in the same room? Sebastian stared at me, for a long moment. The hope and something else, something sharper, moving behind his eyes. And then, slowly, he sat down across from me, and pulled the old map a little closer, and something in his face changed. From the resignation of a man arranging his own funeral to the focus of a man who has just been handed an entirely unexpected weapon, held it up, and found it had an edge. You want to fight him. With gossip, I want to fight him. With the truth. In a room full of people who've spent centuries agreeing not to say it. Gossip is just truth that hasn't been allowed in the door yet, and I am very, very good at letting things in the door. He looked at me a long time. It might get you killed, so might surrendering, so might the door. So might walking out clean into a city that has nothing in it for me. At least this way, if I'm going to bet my life, I'd like to bet it on a hand I dealt myself. Not one that was dealt to me by a man in a nice suit. I've had enough of those hands. I'm done playing them. We spent the rest of day 4 at that table, and all of day 5, and the better part of day 6. He talked, and I listened. The way I'd listened to 1,000 drunks over 1,000 bar tops on 1,000 long nights. Except these stories were older than countries. Older than the maps the countries were drawn on, and the grudges in them had teeth that had never been pulled. He told me about Imogen O'Clair, the woman in gold, who'd been promised a territory 3 centuries ago, the river territory, marked on the old map in a faded hand, by a man who'd never repaid her, never honored it, let it rot, and Casimir had been the one, the quiet one, to take that territory for himself, while she was looking the other way, grieving the broken promise, never thinking to look at who'd profited from the breaking. She'd never been able to prove it, so she'd never been able to say it, and it had sat in her. 300 years, souring, a wound that had never once been allowed to see air. He told me about Castellan Rue, the warm one, the one who collected currency in conversation, who'd asked me where I summered. Castellan had a maker, an elder who'd brought him over 2 centuries back, the way they're all brought over, and that maker had vanished. Under circumstances no one investigated, because the only one with a motive was the only one too powerful to question, and Castellan had spent 200 years not letting himself wonder. Because wondering out loud was a thing that could get a younger creature killed, Casimir. Always at the end of the line, Casimir. He told me about a dozen of them, a dozen old wounds. And a pattern emerged, the way patterns do. When you finally stop looking at people one at a time and start looking at the lines between them. The lines on the map. The lines under the map, every old wound in that room. Traced back, eventually, by a different road each time, to the same hand. Casimir had survived 3 centuries, not because he was the strongest in any given room, he often wasn't, but because no one had ever stood in the middle of the room and connected the lines, out loud, all at once, where everyone could see them at the same time. He's not powerful, I said. On the night of day 6, the fire low, the map between us covered now in my own notes, in a hand that didn't match the 3 old ones, not the way they all think. He's just never been caught. There's a difference, and it's the whole difference, and nobody's ever caught him, because catching him requires someone who remembers everything, and owes him nothing, and isn't afraid of him. And there's never been all 3 in one person, in the same room. At the same time, Sebastian looked at me across the table, in the low firelight, and the look on his face was the one I'd been working toward for 2 days without knowing it. There's never been such a person, he said. There is now, and I watched him understand, fully, the whole shape of it. That the one thing his 300 years couldn't give him. A clean witness, with nothing to lose and nothing to sell and nothing to fear, had walked into his bar on a Thursday night and caught a bottle of bitters, too fast, too clean. Why, he said, quietly. Are you doing this? Truly, the money doesn't require it, the contract doesn't require it. The door is still open. It's open right now. You could be in the car in 10 minutes. You could leave, and I would let you. I'd hate it, but I'd let you. So why? I thought about how to answer that, about whether to give him the strategy or the truth, and then I remembered he was the one man alive who could tell the difference, because somebody asked me once to sign my name to a lie, I said. A small one, a spill that wasn't there, and I said no, and it cost me everything I had. The job, the savings, the cat, 3 months of my life, and I have spent every one of those months wondering, in the dark, on buses, whether I was an idiot, for not just signing my name and keeping my life. I looked at him, the fire on his still face, and then I walked into your bar and found out there's a whole room of people, the oldest, strongest things in the world, who've been signing the lie for 300 years, every one of them, just to stay safe, just to keep their one small thing. And I looked at that room, and I am so tired of safe. I'd rather lose everything again, telling the truth in a room that doesn't want to hear it, than keep anything at all by keeping quiet. I tried quiet's opposite once and it ruined me, and I would do it again tomorrow. That's not a strategy. You asked for the truth. That's the truth. The fire moved. That's not a strategy, Sebastian said. Almost gently, no. It's a reason. You asked me, on the first morning, whether I could be bought. And the answer is still no. It's just that now I know what I'm spending instead. He was silent a long moment, and then he reached across the table and put his hand over mine, cold over warm, the way it had become, over 6 days, a thing that meant something specific, rather than anything else, a thing with no audience, no conclave to perform it for, just his cold hand, and my warm one, and the low fire. If this fails, I can't protect you. I need you to hear that, not as a warning, but as a fact. Once you stand up in that room and start naming things, you're not my intended anymore. You're a witness, and witnesses, in my world, don't have protectors. They have very short futures, I know. There's no version of this where I shield you. The whole power of it, the entire engine, is that you stand alone, unowned, unbought, unattached to me or my weakness or my debts. If you're standing under my protection when you speak, they'll say I put the words in your mouth, that you're my puppet, my desperate forgery, and the truth will die in the room with the lie. The only way it works, the only way, is if you let go of me, entirely, in front of all of them, I know, I said again. And that was the part that neither of us said out loud, that sat in the firelight between our 2 hands, that the only way I could save him was to publicly stop being his, to stand in the center of that room, with no hand at my back, and no cold weight beside me, alone as a person can be in a room full of things that want her gone, the exact thing he'd hired me, on the first night, to pretend I'd never have to be. The conclave reconvened on the night of day 7, the warehouse the city didn't know about. The chandeliers from another century, dripping their not-quite-flame light. The fabric that moved without air, all of it. The same, except this time. I knew what I was walking into, and I had a hand I'd dealt myself, We came in together, his hand at my back, one last time, and I let myself feel it, the cold, the certainty, the specific weight of it that I'd spent a week learning, because I knew that in a few minutes, I was going to walk out from under it, on purpose, and I wanted to remember it. The way you memorize a thing you're about to give away. They turned when we entered, the way they had the first time, the collective reorientation. And this time, I welcomed it. I'd spent the first night trying not to be. Tonight I needed every eye in the room. Casimir was already there. He saw us come in, and he smiled, because he thought he knew how the night was going to go. He thought Sebastian had come to surrender. He'd probably received word, through whatever leak ran in that house, that Sebastian was preparing a withdrawal. He thought he'd already won. He thought tonight was the markdown, the thing he'd waited centuries to pay nothing for, which was exactly what I needed him to think. Sebastian moved toward the center of the room, the way a man moves toward a thing he's dreaded. I stayed at his side, for one more minute. Imogen in her gold was watching, and Castellan with his working smile, and all of them, the whole old dark of that room, pointed at us, and Casimir lifted his glass. Sebastian, he said, his voice carrying, to every corner, easy, certain, we had begun. The other evening. A conversation. Perhaps tonight is the night to finish it. In front of friends, it was a beautiful trap. I had to admire it, even hating it. He was inviting Sebastian to surrender, in public, out loud, where it could never be taken back. Sebastian opened his mouth, and I stepped forward. Before he could speak and I let go of his arm, I felt the whole room register it. The mortal woman, the intended. Stepping away from the man whose side she had not left all night. The cold hand, gone from my back. The half-inch of space between us widening to a yard, and me, standing alone, in the center of all of them, unowned, unattached. A small, warm, mortal thing in a room of the deathless and the slow. Before he answers you, I said. And my voice did not shake. I was proud of that. I will be proud of that for the rest of my life. I'd like to say something. As the only person in this room, who doesn't owe a single one of you anything at all, the silence that followed was a different kind of silence. The kind that comes before something breaks. Casimir turned to look at me, and the smile was still there, but behind it, something had gone very still. The bartender, he said. Pleasant. Lethal. The two things at once. I don't believe this is your conversation. My dear, no, it's not. That's exactly why I'm the only one who can have it. Everyone else in this room has a reason to keep quiet, a debt, a favor, a thing they're afraid of losing. I don't. I walked in here 7 days ago, with $38 in my pocket, and I'll walk out with about the same. So I've got nothing to protect, nothing to sell. Nothing you can take from me that I haven't already lost once and survived. Which makes me, as far as I can tell, the only honest mouth. In the building, a murmur moved through the room. The first crack in the ice, Casimir set down his glass. How charming. And what? Precisely. Does the honest mouth wish to say? I want to talk about debts. And I turned. Not to Casimir, to Imogen. You were promised the river territory 3 centuries ago, and it was taken from you, while you were looking the other way, grieving a broken promise, and you never found out who took it, did you? In 300 years. You never once found out. Imogen went very still, in gold. Like a struck bell that hasn't yet decided to ring. That's an old story, and not one immortal could know. I know it, because the man standing beside me has been alive longer than your grievance. And he watched it happen. I didn't look at Sebastian. I kept my eyes on Imogen, steady, the way you hold a frightened animal's gaze. It was taken by the same man, who's standing across this room, right now, inviting your host to surrender, so he can add Sebastian's territory to the one he already took from you. The room went cold, in a way that had nothing to do with Sebastian. A colder cold. The cold of 300 years of suspicion finding, all at once, a shape. That's a lie, Casimir said, is it? And I turned. To Castellan, your maker. 200 years ago, vanished, and no one investigated, because the only one with a reason to want him gone was the only one too powerful to question. You've wondered? For 200 years. You've made yourself not wonder, haven't you? Because wondering out loud was a thing that could get you killed. Castellan's warm face was no longer warm. The working smile had stopped working. You're a child, Casimir said, to me. And his voice had changed. The patience was thinning, the river slowing where it shouldn't slow. Which was exactly what I'd been waiting for. The whole night had been built to bring it. You know nothing. You repeat stories, fed to you, by a fading man, trying to save himself, with borrowed words, from a borrowed woman, and there it was, the crack. The one he didn't know he'd made, a fading man, I repeated. Slowly, so the whole room heard it land. Funny. That's the word you keep coming back to. Fading. You've said it twice now, in 2 evenings. To me and to him, and now to a room full of people. You're awfully invested, in everyone believing Sebastian is the weak one. You say it like it's free, but nothing in this room is free. You taught them that yourselves. Casimir said nothing, which in his mouth was the loudest thing yet. Here's what I think, and now I let my voice fill the room. The way you fill a room when you've spent 12 years learning to be heard over a crowd without ever raising your voice. The way you cut through 40 conversations with one clear sentence. I think you've been telling everyone in this room, for longer than any of them realizes, that someone else is fading, someone else is weak, someone else can't be trusted. A private story, told to each of them in a quiet corner about somebody who wasn't them, and every time, the weak one, lost something, and every time, when the dust settled, it ended up. With you, I turned, slowly, to the whole room, to every face. He didn't survive 3 centuries because he's strong. He survived because none of you ever stood in the same room at the same time and compared your stories. He kept you apart, with whispers, one quiet corner at a time, and you let him, because each of you was protecting one small thing you were too afraid to lose, and he counted on that. He has always counted on that. Your fear is the only territory he's ever truly owned. The silence now was enormous. It had weight. It pressed on the chandeliers. Imogen was looking at Casimir, and so was Castellan, and so was every old creature in that room. And for the first time, they were not looking at him as the strongest thing present. They were looking at him as a thing that had been caught. This is absurd, Casimir said, and he reached for the old certainty, the patience, the total control that had carried him through 400 years, and couldn't quite find it. His hand closed on nothing. You'll take the word of a human bartender. Over 3 centuries of, they don't have to take my word, and I turned to Sebastian. This was the moment. The whole week had been built toward it, and it depended on something I couldn't control. The one thing I didn't have and couldn't fake, it depended on him. Stepping forward, and giving the room the one thing only he possessed, proof. You watched all of it, I said, to him, quietly, but the room could hear, because the room had gone silent enough to hear a held breath. 300 years of it. You're the only one old enough to have seen every piece from the inside, so tell them. Not for me, not even for yourself. Tell them because it's true, and because not one of them has ever been allowed to hear it, out loud. And I watched Sebastian Vale make a choice, a man who had survived 3 centuries, by never once giving anyone a single thing that could be used against him. The oldest instinct in him, older than the hunger, older than the cold, stepped forward, into the center of the room, beside me, and gave them the truest thing he had, the river territory, he said. His voice low and carrying, filling the room the way the cold used to, was taken by Casimir. In the autumn of the year, Imogen turned her attention east. I was there. I saw it done, and I said nothing. For 300 years. Because saying it would have cost me, and I was, as every one of you has been, a coward. About my own safety, he looked around the room. At all of them, Castellan's maker was ended by Casimir. On the night the eastern houses fell. I know this. Because Casimir came to me first, and asked me to help him do it, and I refused, and then I says nothing for 200 years. I let you wonder, Castellan. I watched you not wonder, and I said nothing. The room was breaking apart. I could feel it. The way ice breaks, not all at once. A crack here, a crack there, a long groan from somewhere underneath, and then, he has done this, Sebastian said, to every one of you, in this room. He told each of you a private story, in a quiet corner, about someone else's weakness, and you believed it, every time. Because it was never about you, it was always about someone else, until tonight. Tonight it's about all of you at once. He looked at Casimir. She's right, I am fading. That part is true, and I'll not deny it in front of you, but I would rather fade, telling the truth, than rule another century. Keeping your secrets, and the room turned, not toward Sebastian. Away from Casimir, I watched it happen. The thing I'd bet my life on. The thing I'd worked out at 4 in the morning, in the white linen, while the house breathed. The conclave didn't run on strength, it ran on debt, and I had just stood in the middle of it, and called in every debt. At once, Casimir looked around the room, at 3 centuries of carefully separated grudges, suddenly standing together, in one place, at the same time, looking at him, and for the first time. Since I'd laid eyes on him, the stillness in his face was not calculation, it was fear. This proves nothing, he said, and his voice, for the first time in perhaps 400 years, was not patient, It was the voice of a man reaching for a railing. "That isn't there. It proves everything," Imogen said, in gold, stepping forward, out of the crowd, into the open, because we have all wondered, every one of us, for a very long time, and we were never, all in the same room, to wonder. Together, she looked at him, with 300 years of cold behind her eyes, the river coming back to her at last. "You will not be welcome, in any house, aligned with mine. As of tonight, nor mine," said Castellan, the warmth gone for good, and then another voice, and another, around the room, the withdrawal of alliance, one after another, like ice, coming off a roof, in spring, the whole long winter of his power letting go at once. I'd been right about that, too, because in their world, there is a thing worse than death. There is being alone in it, forever, with no house, no alliance, no one, to stand at your back, a creature that lives 1,000 years and spends every one of them, unwelcome, everywhere. The door of every house in the world, closed, that was the future. The room handed Casimir. In the space of about 90 seconds, he looked at me, one last time, across the room, over all those turned backs, and there was something in his ancient face that I will remember. For the rest of my short mortal life, it was the look of a thing that had just been beaten by the one weapon it had never once thought to defend against, a person who remembered everything and owed him nothing. He left without another word, out into the old dark, alone, and the warehouse the city didn't know about, closed around the empty space where he'd been, the way the bar had closed around Sebastian on my very first night, the room healing over the wound of his leaving like water over a stone. I had won, and I was still standing alone, in the center of the room, with no hand at my back. It took me a moment to remember that winning had a cost, and that I'd agreed to pay it, to stand alone, unowned, to let go of him, in front of all of them, for the play to work. The play had worked, and now the play was over, and I didn't know, standing there in the midnight blue dress, with the room rearranging itself around me, whether you could let go of a thing on purpose, as a move, as a strategy, and still. Somehow, get it back! Sebastian crossed the room slowly, through the old creatures, who parted for him now, the way they hadn't. An hour ago, he came to where I stood, alone, in the center, and he stopped in front of me, and he did not reach for my back. He held out his hand in front of all of them, where they could all see. He held out his cold hand to a mortal woman who had just stood alone and unowned and won. "You don't have to take it," he said, quietly, so only I could hear. "The contract is finished. It's day 7, the 7th night. You stood alone. You owe me nothing. You never will again. For the rest of your life, you're free as anyone in this room has ever been. Freer. The door is wide open. It's the widest it's ever been." I looked at his hand. "Is that what you want? For me to be free of you?" No, without hesitation this time. None at all. It's what I should want, and I am so tired of wanting what I should. I looked at him, the man who could empty a room by entering it, fading, honest, for the first time in 300 years, with his hand out, in a room full of the most dangerous things alive, offering me, not protection, not a contract, not safety, a choice. "Here's the thing about being free," I said. "I spent 3 months thinking it was what I'd lost. The job, the money, the cat, the safety. I thought freedom was just another word. For having nothing left to lose, I put my hand in his, cold over warm. The right way round, this time, with no audience that mattered. Turns out, it's the opposite. Freedom's the thing that lets you choose something. When you don't have to. When nobody's making you. When you could walk out clean. And you stay anyway." His fingers closed around mine. "I'm not staying because I owe you. I'm not staying because I'm yours. I stood alone in this room tonight. Every one of these people watched me do it. So nobody, including you, gets to say I didn't have a choice. That's the whole point of what I just did. I made myself a person who's choosing. I looked up at him. I'm staying. Because I want to. That's the only reason that was ever worth anything. And it's the one I've got. And something happened. In the faith of a man who had not let himself hope. In a very long time. The thing underneath. The thing he'd kept behind a locked distance. For 3 centuries, it came up into the light, and he didn't put it away. We left the conclave together, his hand, not at my back this time, in mine, where I'd put it, on purpose, where everyone had seen me put it. We drove home through the old city, the iron and the magnolias, and the nightlight that exists only in places built on water. Ondine was waiting in the entrance hall. The lamp burned, the way it always did. She looked at us, at our hands, at my neck where the dark stone still hung, and something in her face. The face she'd held still for 30 years, made the very smallest change the change of someone who has watched a thing end badly, many times, and is looking at the evidence that this time. It didn't. She'd have liked you, Ondine said. Quietly, Lenore. She'd have been furious. That you got the ending she didn't, and then she'd have liked you. For getting it, thank you. For the warning, you didn't take it, no. But I needed it. It was the warning that gave me the map. About the debts, about the room, about how he kept everyone apart. You handed me the whole thing. You just thought. You were handing me a reason to run, Ondine looked at me. For a long moment, 30 years, she said. I thought I was the only one who got out of that room alive and carried it. Turns out, I was just early, and she did a thing I had never seen her do. In 7 days, she smiled. It didn't use the same muscles as most people's smiles. It had been a long time since it had been used at all. But it meant the same thing, 3 weeks later. I went back to the Hollow Hour, not because I had to. The contract was done. The money was banked. My mother's debt was paid, the whole ugly weight of it lifted. There was a savings account again, with my name on it, and a number that didn't make me flinch. Walter was on a plane, in his philosophical fury, coming home. I went back because I wanted to. Ondine looked up from the bar, the way she had, on the first night, and read something in me. She'd read before, in another woman, a long time ago. Well, she said. Well, I said, 8 o'clock, and I tied on the apron, and took my place behind the bar, in the amber light, with the soft noise of 100 quiet conversations that only I could hear. He came in on Thursday, not with the arrival that dissolves a room, not with the full weight of what he is. He came in quietly, the heavy door held briefly open, the night air moving through, before it closed, and he sat at the bar. Not in the private booth. The booth was for the performance, and this was not a performance. I set a glass of water in front of him. He looked at it. You don't drink, I said. No, but you come in, yes, why? He looked at me, across the bar. In the amber light, you know why? I wanted to hear you say it, because this is where you are. I leaned on the bar. There's a place, 2 streets over. Makes very good coffee. Tin ceiling. Old man behind the counter, 8 in the morning. Before my shift, his mouth moved. The thing that wasn't quite a smile, but was its antechamber, tomorrow, and on the 4th Thursday, he brought a book, set it on the bar, while I worked, open to where he'd stopped, and read, in the amber light, while the bar did what bars do. At that hour, no performance, no management, no conclave, a man with a book, in a room that contained someone he had chosen. And I moved up and down the bar and did my work. And when I passed close enough, I could feel the cold of him, which was not absence, but presence, specific and particular. And his eye had arrived in this city with $38, and a piece of paper soft at the creases, and an address that was supposed to be a new beginning. It had been, as it turned out. Exactly that. Just not in any of the directions I'd been looking. I poured 2 glasses of water and set one near his elbow. He looked up. 7 days was the deal, I said. It was, what comes after 7? He was quiet a moment, and then, in the voice that was his truest register, the one without performance, or management, or 300 years of careful distance, he said, everything, and outside, the city went on. Doing what cities do, when you're not watching, being itself, the iron and the magnolias, and the warm river air, all of it unchanged and entirely different, the way everything is, when you've changed. Inside of it, a room, that was quiet, because it was full.